geeks and geekettes, gats and gittens, kids and kidettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic fans all around the world. It's time for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a professional comic book writer of world fame and renown, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Still playing with this new format. See, I'm still playing. I'm playing with this new format. I'm just fooling around. So some of you said you like seeing my smiling face. Others said you really like the slideshow. So there's enough of you out there who actually watch this show that I'm going to try to figure out how to make everyone happy. And you know how that always ends up. In any case, let's get to our first question. Dwayne Thomas, one of the questions that Jack Kirby knew people would have when he started writing Kandi was, how do you pronounce Kandi? Is it Kamandi or is it Commandi? Thus, he makes it very clear that Kandi was born and raised within a military base that was divided into 4 commands. Command A, Command B, Command C, and Command D. And that he was named for the command in which he was born. Therefore, it is not Commandi, it's Commandi. Commandi. Well, thank you, Dwayne. I mean, I knew all that. But I prefer Commandi. And why would the pronunciation change? Because pronunciations change all the time. And we're led to believe that Commandi was born in Command D, and possibly, several generations of people underground. And over time, pronunciations change. Let's take the town of Dubois in Pennsylvania. Its name wasn't originally Dubois, it was Dubois, because it was a French trading post. So, things change over time, and I just think Commandi sounds better than Commandi. Like Canada sounds better than Canada. So we will have to agree to disagree. RB Probst, would you like to write storylines for pro wrestling? I've never been asked, although I live here in Tampa, and there's more pro wrestlers per capita in Tampa than anywhere in the world. So this is kind of where professional wrestling was born, and a whole bunch of them hang out down here. I've met lots and lots of guys. I don't follow wrestling, so I'm not real familiar with who they are, although I really liked meeting Fred Ottman, who you wrestling fans will know as Tugboat, and apparently several other characters he's played across his career. Fun guy, awesome guy to hang out with. I run into wrestlers all the time in my travels. I was in first class with Hulk Hogan flying out to LA once. In fact, we sat across the aisle from each other both ways on the red eye from Los Angeles to Tampa and back again. And when you do local shows here in Florida, a lot of times, wrestlers show up because they've got their own comic books. And would I write for them? Yeah, I'd write a comic book for Tugboat. I mean, why not? These guys are pretty much superheroes. They have outrageous, hyperbolic adventures. I could write a wrestling book. I've just never been asked to. This is not the last time in this video that wrestling will come up. So hang on, wrestling fans. RB again, if you were offered the chance to do a comic book biography of any musical act, solo act, or band, who would entice you into the job? The Kinks. I like the story of the Kinks because it isn't like every other rock and roll story or every music bio story. Every single music bio story is the same. Singer, songwriter, musician. They come from humble background. All of a sudden they're famous, and the fame overwhelms them, and they get into sex and drugs and alcohol and almost kill themselves, and then finally redeem themselves at the end, or die, choking on their own vomit. I like the Kinks because their story didn't go that way. Ray Davis, leader of the Kinks, and his brother both admit they kind of got bored with that scene in the 60s. You know, at the height of the British invasion, they had women throwing themselves at them, you know, free dope, you know, whatever you wanted. And they were like, you know, yeah, we're kind of losing sight of who we are here. And they kind of walked away from all of that crazy lifestyle early on, which is why they're still alive today. So, and I like the Kinks because they're working class guys. They never were artistes. There's a lot of humor in their songs. They sing about, you know, they sing about things other than teenage love. They were the first guys to have a hit single about a transsexual. They write about the price of gas, how hard it is to get a job. I mean, these are all things I really, really related to in the early 70s when I discovered the Kinks. I mean, they spoke to me in a way that the Beatles and Bob Dylan didn't. And I like the fact that they wrote music that, to their mind, the ultimate success in their mind was, particularly in Ray Davis's mind, was that people would sing those songs in the pubs. That these were songs that you would learn and everybody would know them and everybody could sing along. And if you ever go to one of their shows, I mean, it's very much interactive. They get the audience involved in what they're doing. But also there's a lot of wild stories with the Kinks. Even though they weren't drinking and getting high all the time, they were still crazy men. And there's lots of stories of Ray and his brother Dave physically fighting each other on stage for some reason. There's a horrific story where somehow an amp fell off the back of a stage at a stadium show. And because everyone was wired up except Ray, everybody was wired, their instruments were all wired and mic'd up. Everybody got dragged off of the stage, actually fell off the back of the stage, leaving Ray by himself, singing all alone with no musical accompaniment. That's a great scene. Also, they got kicked out of the United States for a long time. They had problems with censorship in England over really silly things like referencing Coca-Cola in a song Lola. So they couldn't get airplay on the BBC. Stuff like that. I mean, it'd be a fun story to tell. And because unlike most musical bios, there would be a lot of humor in it, much like their music. Roland Greystoke 5601. What's your favorite Nick Cage movie? Nick Cage, man. I mean, I can't miss a Nick Cage movie. I don't know how anybody else feels. This guy turns out a lot of movies. Seems like one a week. And I catch them all. Good, the bad, and the, I watched Willy's Wonderland recently. Don't. I swear he couldn't have been on set more than 2 days. The movie is awful. It's beneath the contempt of Mystery Science Theater 3000. That's how bad it is. And he says not one word during the whole movie. And I could just imagine Cage on the phone when they tell him that we need you to come for the cast reading of the script. And he says, look, I'll be in your movie, but I'm not going to read any of that dialogue. My character's not going to say anything. I can imagine that. Because basically he just wanted to get in and out of there as quick as possible. Now, what Nick Cage's work ethic is a mystery to me. He seems to say yes to every project, no matter how cheap. But he also gets offered, higher budgeted films. I mean, he's obviously a draw on streaming video elsewhere. Very few of his films get any kind of theatrical release. So he's sought after actor who just can't say no to anybody for whatever reason. I hope it's not a Bruce Willis type situation where he's stockpiling money against the day when he's, disabled in some way. I mean, that would be very, very sad. Or he just likes to work. He's thinking, hey, they're calling, I'm going to go. But the end result is like every third or fourth Nick Cage movie is actually good. The others are okay or simply awful, like Willy's Wonderland. but they're always interesting because he's always interesting. But my favorite, and when I say favorite, people ask me, what's your favorite this, what's your favorite that? I go to the movie I watch more often than any others. And of all of Nick Cage's movies, the one I rewatch most is Matchstick Men, a con man movie directed by Ridley Scott. And Cage is terrific in it. He's got a really complex, deep character with a really interesting arc, and he really engages. He really brings you into the story using his comedic talents as well as his dramatic talents, and you can't keep your eyes off him. And of all of his movies and many that I really enjoy. This is the one I watch more than any other. Another one of his that I watch pretty frequently. Let's see if I can get it up here. I can't. What's going on here? Yes, Frozen Ground. It's a sort of cat and mouse serial killer detective story set in Alaska based on a true story. Nick Cage is the obsessive-driven homicide detective who can't leave his case alone. This baffling case seems to have, point to a serial killer, but there's not enough clues to lead to any one particular suspect. And there's nature of the crime that he can't quite understand. Killer's played by John Cusack. It's Cage gives a terrific performance here. Showing once again, the guy's got tremendous range. He can be hysterically funny, intentionally or unintentionally, or deeply pensive, deeply dramatic. I mean, he's got all the chops. Frozen Ground is a good one. If you like that kind of movie, if you like a police procedural flick in an interesting setting. So anyway, Gentle Savage. Mr. Dixon, have you ever encountered anybody that you never expected to be a fan of your work, let alone have any interest in comics? We're back to pro wrestling. A wrestler named Raven. Again, I don't know these guys. I don't follow pro wrestling. But back in the 90s, I went out to dinner at a steak, I think it was Morton's Steakhouse, with Dan Jurgens, Jerry Ordway, a bunch of other people. And this big guy, this guy comes over to our table and he says, "Are you Chuck Dixon?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes on and on about how much he loves Nightwing. I read all those issues. I really like him. And he was just huge fan. And then and I said, "Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind words and everything else." And he goes, "Yeah, I just wanted to meet you. I just wanted to shake your hand." I said, well, thank you. And he goes back to his own table and everybody at the table's looking at me. And finally, somebody says, do you know who that was? And I said, "No, that's Raven. He's like this huge wrestling star." And I'm like, "I don't know. I didn't know." So another guy that I knew was interested in comics because he was a comic professional, Darwin Cook. Darwin Cook was a fan of mine. He used to quote lines that I had written to me, back to me, particularly Punisher lines that he really dug. And that was, to me, you always want the respect of your peers in any business you're in. I don't care if you're a plumber or I was going to say United States Senator, but nobody respects them. But you want people to say, "Hey, that guy's good. He's good at what he does." And of course, Darwin was awesome at what he did, and it meant a lot for him to tell me that he was a follower. He read stuff, and he would talk to me about things, even obscure titles that I had read, telling me that he actually sought my work out. Much like like you or I do if we have a favorite creator, and that was pretty cool. Another big surprise: Sylvester Stallone. Sylvester Stallone is a fan. I didn't know he was that into comics until I began, working with him. And the guy likes comics. He likes good comics, and he includes me in that crowd. So it was always very, very complimentary of my comic book work, and I appreciate that a whole bunch. And what I like to do now is interrupt the proceedings a little bit and ask you to subscribe. I'm trying to build this channel, trying to bring more people in. You know, the people that have been following me loyally for years now, asking great questions and everything else. Let's grow this. Let's make this bigger. Let's bring more people in, because I think there's an audience for this kind of stuff. There's obviously a curiosity. I get lots and lots of questions. I'm having a hard time keeping up with them at this point. So hit that subscribe button and help us out, because that helps more than anything else. John Bua, what would you define as pandering to an audience? Oh, what is the difference between a hack and an actual writer? You know, pandering to an audience is when you're dumbing down your own work because you think the audience is stupid. This is the mistake people make when they think they're going to write for kids. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Kids are the toughest audience. And it's not because they have a short attention span. I argue against that. Kids do not have a short attention span for things they like. So if you're going to tell a kid a story, you better make sure he likes it. And you better make sure that stuff happens and it makes sense. And there's an element of, well, what happens next? You have to keep kids engaged. Well, you have to keep any reader engaged. You should always work toward keeping your readers engaged. As Elmore Leonard says, don't write the parts that readers skip. And it's, in comics especially, comics need to engage, you know, visually. They need to engage story-wise. And, but as far as pandering goes, if you're dumbing down your work, like kids won't understand this, kids will, you know, I need to make this simpler. These characters can't be this complex. No, kids are sophisticated. They understand. They get it. Now, they may not be able to articulate it, and they may not actually be consciously dissecting the character as you went along, but they get it. They understand the language of entertainment. They understand the language of cinema. They understand the language of comics, that they're comic book readers. And a lot of times, if you talk over the kids' heads, it's not a bad thing. Stan Lee certainly presented me with a whole bunch of words I had to look up in the dictionary. And it's always a good thing. And Larry Hama had a thing. He had a saying. And he was telling me about how Hasbro came back to him at the beginning of G.I. Joe and said, there's way too many technical aspects on the back of the G.I. Joe cards. For the G.I. Joe files, you're putting in way too much detail on military ordnance. Your kids aren't going to know what this stuff is. And Larry's reply to that was, when kids don't know what something is, they assume it's cool. I mean, if you see that, you know, the gun that Snake Eyes uses and you've never heard of it before, well, it's freaking Snake Eyes. You got to assume it's got to be the coolest gun in the world, right? I mean, he's right. And when you were a kid, that's the way you were. If there were things you didn't understand, you just assumed, well, I don't know about that, but it must be awesome. I want to know more. Now, as far as being a hack, and this subject will come up later with a specific writer. No, I'm not going to run some writer down. I'm not going to tell you, oh, this guy's a big hack. Don't read his stuff. But a hack is someone who is just writing for the money. They're not engaged. And if you write for a living, you either get into it and you lose yourself in it, like a compulsion, like a fever dream, like a self-propelled acid trip in your head. If you're doing that as a writer, well, you're not a hack. If you're sitting there going, I gotta write 2,000 words a day, I gotta get this down, I can't have lunch till I've written 500 words, you know, I can't do this and so on. But if you're doing that, you're a hack. I talked to a guy, it was part of some failed film project. I've lost count of how many failed film projects I've talked to producers. And this guy was writing a Western novel. And he was just talking about how it was a pain. It was a drudge. He couldn't wait till it was done. You know, take this off my hands. You know, it just sounded like every word was pain to him. It was all tedium. And my thoughts were, well, why the hell are you writing it? You know, I mean, it must be a paycheck at the end of it. And I've never done that. I've never taking a job that is going to be tedious and difficult and boring uh, just for the cash. I've turned down high page rates on projects that I simply wasn't interested in. I knew I couldn't invest myself in them. They wouldn't be fun to write. And I've been writing a long time, and I've written a lot of stuff. And I still look forward to writing. I still like writing. I still can't wait to write. I still get lost in my head in that world. I'm lost in that. You can ask my wife. I'm lost in my head in that world most of my waking hours. So that's what a hack is. They don't get lost. They can't wait to stop doing it. They can't wait to go have a drink or take a nap. Get this crap out of the way. That's not to say that if you're involved in a long project, you're not looking forward to the end of it. I mean, you're writing a novel. You're worried the whole time. Will I finish this? Will it be any good when I'm done? All the rest. But when you're worried about that, you're not a hack. Hacks don't worry about that. They just want to get to the word count required of them and send that sucker off to be edited. Dan Perrin. Knowing you're a huge fan of the superstar that was Denny ONeal, I think we all owe him immensely for what he did for Batman as a writer and editor. I'd love to know your favorite Batman stories by him, as well as your thoughts on his other DC projects like The Question, Azrael, Richard Dragon, etc. Yeah, Denny, we all owe Denny a debt of gratitude, all Batman fans the world round, and I think all comic fans the world round, because he sort of lifted Batman out of the campy funk that he was in, that DC continued even after the TV show went off the air, and seriously began before the TV show came on the air. I mean, Batman leading up to DC's new look and the premiere of the television show, Batman was in a slump, and he'd been in a slump for quite a while. The stories were goofy, they were silly. Nobody was really taking the character very seriously, certainly not taking the reader seriously. And along comes Denny and decides, I want to turn Batman into the character I used to love as a kid. And that's what he did. Now, as far as my favorite Denny stories, I mean, it's hard not to go back to the Neil Adams run. I mean, these guys had a chemistry, sometimes volatile chemistry, but they had a chemistry. And a lot of stuff they created, Ra's al Ghul and Talia and stuff, those stories helped, both the stories and the imagery helped to grow the character up. I mean, Neil's art style moved the character away from the sort of stylized version, the sort of anodyne, boring looking Batman, to a more dynamic, realistic, more quote unquote mature look at the character. And you combine that with Denny's muscular writing and Denny's taking Batman into, almost James Bond territory in some stories, police procedural crime, along with Frank Robbins. Let's not forget Frank Robbins came along, was writing the campy stuff. When he saw what Denny was doing, sort of totally switched his tone in writing Batman to write stories, matching Denny's tone on the character. So, all of this, goes to create some really, really memorable stories. But I've spoken before about, and I've told this to Denny several times. I did not like Green Lantern, Green Arrow. I did not like topical, relevant stories, particularly since they came from one particular political point of view. They were agenda-driven comics. They did not sell. They're looked back upon fondly by readers because it's the Neil Adams, Denny ONeal team together on two popular characters. But these books did not do well, were not well received, and I didn't care for them, still don't. But some of my favorite Superman is Denny. Denny didn't want to write Superman, but they assigned him Superman. I think it was one of those things. Back in the day, there were characters no one wanted to write, and both at Marvel and DC. And if you sort of backed an editor into a corner and stuck him with a pin, they'd admit, there's some of our characters nobody wants to write, and some of our most popular characters nobody wants to write. So Superman was one of them. And they sort of assigned Denny against his will to write Superman, which forced Denny not a hack, forced Denny to think about Superman. What did he like about Superman as a kid? What could he bring out? How can he make Superman more believable, more human? And this run, which is unfortunately short, Kurt Swan, some of Kurt Swan's best work, Murphy Anderson on inks, Murphy, awesome talent, a great marriage of two great, iconic DC artists, with Denny's more humanistic, more dramatic type stories. And Denny does all this without breaking Superman, without changing Superman in any new way. He just enhances the elements of Superman that he felt had been missing over the years, much like he did with Batman. And I really, really dig this run. It needs more attention, and it's worth it for you to take a look. There was a trade paperback a number of years ago. It's probably out of print. It's probably like $500 on Amazon. But if you can find a copy of it, these stories are definitely worth taking a look at. Kian Kurji, what are your thoughts on Walter B. Gibson's Shadow? Is Batman a ripoff of the Shadow? Do you have any favorite Shadow pulps? The Shadow. He's not a. Batman is an amalgam of a lot of different things. Sherlock Holmes, the Shadow, Dracula, German expressionist silent films, which people will still remember it at the time. The Phantom, things like that. So the Scarlet Pimpernel. There's a lot of elements that go in to make Batman, which is one of the reasons he remains so popular, because they kind of took the best of all these different iconic fictional characters, boiled them down into one character in an awesome costume. But what do I think of the Shadow? It's a tremendous creation. For a pulp character, there's a lot of depth. And what do I think of Walter Gibson? Well, I got to meet Walter Gibson. I've told this story before, but I got to meet Walter Gibson at a convention, and it was a panel hosted by Jim Steranko, and there was maybe 40 people in the room. This was 1972, 73 maybe, and I sat front row because I never met a writer before. And I didn't want to just hear him talk. I actually wanted to meet him. And I was, a young kid with a dream. I was still in high school. And I asked a lot of impertinent, possibly rude questions. Because I just wanted to know, how do you write 2 novels a month? And he talked somewhat about his process and about the long working hours. And where he would get his ideas and things like that. And I asked possibly the rudest question you can ask a writer is, are there any of your books you think are actually good? And what I meant in my own very awkward, crude way was, you wrote so many Shadow novels. You can't remember them all. There's no way you could remember the hundreds of novels that you wrote featuring the Shadow. But is there one that you remember fondly? And he said, yes, it was the Romanoff Jewels. He says, I really think, I did a good job on that. I think that would work as a standalone crime novel. And he recommended that I try to find it. And luckily it was in paperback. I did not read it in the original pulp. Luckily there was a paperback reprint. I sought it out and I liked it very much. And I consequently read a bunch of his others as well, because they were readily available in paperback. And I enjoyed all of them. Fun stuff. So yeah, thumbs up to the Shadow, of course. Sid, oh man, Iswaran? I don't know what your nationality is, so I have no clue, how to pronounce that. But welcome anyway. Last week, you discussed Rod Serling and why you aren't the biggest fan of his writing, finding it a bit too ham-fisted and preachy. Following on that, what are your thoughts on the first Planet of the Apes film, the screenplay of which he wrote, which is pretty much a feature film-length, big-budget episode of The Twilight Zone? I think Serling was he obviously was a great writer. He's a terrific writer with a terrific vision for how to elevate television. to something more than just a diversion. Because he wrote other stuff, Requiem for a Heavyweight, a number of things which were highly successful on television at the time, in addition to Twilight Zone. I also wrote a Western series, The Loner, which is very good. Lloyd Bridges in the lead. Short-lived, only lasted one season, but good stuff. He liked the Western genre. But I think he's the perfect guy to adapt Planet of the Apes. I never read the novel. I don't think it ends the way that the movie ends. And I don't know anything about the background on Planet of the Apes, how it was written, who made the decisions, and everything else. But you got to think Serling had something to do with that ending. Where are we going with this? And he also had a lot to do with elevating the intellectual level of the film, where it asks a lot of philosophical questions about what it is to be human. What does an advanced society look like? How does a civilization determine that it has reached peak? The difficulties as you try to build a society as a new species, unused to being in a society. How does that work out? And the rules about the way that apes interact with each other, translated to a higher form of community, is all interesting. And then all of this is addressed in the film to some point or another, either implicit or complicit. And my only problem with the film is the more I learn about apes is the chimpanzees should have been the dangerous ones. They put the gorillas as the dangerous ones. And it's like, in nature, gorillas aren't a threat to man. Chimpanzees are. They're nasty. Anyway, that's the only thing that I would change about it. But yeah, I mean, I think Serling was the right guy for this job. He was going to take what could have been a silly, kind of stupid, vapid, gimmicky, high concept movie, and he made it something more than that, and more than just its twist ending. The ending obviously is unforgettable. It's an amazing bit of filmmaking. But what leads up to it is all worthy. It's all good stuff. Unfortunately, the sequels in the 70s were just wretched. They just got worse and worse and cheaper. Why you build a franchise this popular and then spend less money on the sequels, I'll never understand. Except I think this was in an age when the studios didn't quite understand genre. They didn't quite understand science fiction and horror. They were happy enough to make money at it, but they didn't get, that they could make even more if they created quality products. Although Beneath the Planet of the Apes, I love that movie. That's an awesome movie. Brick Hard Slab. The Levon Cade movies are going to be top of the line if stars align. Are going to be top of the line if the stars align. But there's a franchise that's past its prime, The Expendables. I know you're not spending Christmas vacations or anything together, but Bad Times would make a good new franchise, and Stallone can make a good movie or TV show. I think the books could be expanded into a series. Just a suggestion, but I think it would be awesome. Yeah, actually, as far as The Expendables, I've said this before. The Expendables is a franchise. Sly didn't have a lot of control, even though he created that franchise. He didn't have a lot of control over it. The producers producing it kind of called all the shots, and that franchise never became what Sly wanted it to be. And he and I talked a lot on all of the movies. We talked a lot about 2, we talked a lot about 3, we talked a lot about 4, and none of them went where he wanted to go. He looked upon Fast and Furious, at least the first 5 Fast and Furious movies, as the model for a franchise because each movie was different. And I think that's what attracted him to Levon Cade, because I made an effort to make each Levon Cade book different than the last one. I didn't just keep rewriting the same story. So in the series, you get a war story, a prison story, a heist story, a Die Hard type story, a chase story. And, I think that's what he liked about the series, the variety. Now, as far as Bad Times go, he and I have talked about Bad Times a number of times. He put me together with producers at other production companies, and we've talked about Bad Times with Sly writing and producing, along with other producers. And I talked to some big name producers who very, very much like this, and they really welcome Sly's involvement with it. In fact, I'll tell you something that's never been made public, just between you and me. When Expendables 4 was being talked about, Sly asked me if I would license Bad Times as part of the Expendables franchise. He was so desperate to get that franchise back on track that he thought, well, what if they could travel through time? And so the Expendables would have become the lead characters in the Bad Times series. And I said, yeah, if you think you can make that work, why not? What other offer am I getting for it? Although I have optioned it recently. So I've optioned it. Yay, Bad Times is going to be a movie. No, probably not. 99.99% of the time, options go nowhere. You all know this. It's a wonder any movie ever gets made. But it could have happened. It could happen. You just never know, right? And but I'm cool with the fact that there is a film in production right now. It's filming right now in London of Levon's Trade, and it is a 3-picture deal. It is set up to be a franchise, depending on how well the first film does. Fingers crossed, if it does what The Beekeeper did or exceeds that, they'll definitely go right into the next 2 films. But excited about it. The cast looks great. Everything's coming together. Very, very happy with all of that. And I'll answer a question that people are asking me. So many people ask me this question. I didn't want to attribute it to one person, which is, will you be visiting the Levon's Trade set? And the answer is no, I won't. But here's Mr. Statham on the set the first day. If you've read the novel, you realize that the movie begins, or they began filming the very first chapter of the book. Anyway, yeah, I have really no interest. They haven't invited me to go to the set, and I really have no interest. I haven't bugged them. Maybe they'll send me a cap, or a jacket, or a T-shirt. I mean, that's really, my job is done. I wrote the novel. I really don't want to get involved. They don't need another writer on the set. You got Sly, you got David Ayers involved. So you got 2 Academy Award-winning screenwriters already on board. So, what am I going to do? Just sort of stand around, making people feel like they have to talk to me. So I just have no interest in that aspect. Everybody tells me filmmaking is boring, unless you're actually involved in the process. It's tedious to watch. Would it be interesting? Yeah. But I like following it online and seeing that they're building sets based on places I made up. That's kind of neat. But other than that, no real interest. Damn, I'm not even. So, I'm looking at my controls here. Anyway, making sure that I actually am recording. It'd be sad if I wasn't, because this is such a fabulous performance I'm giving here. Anyway, that's no interest in visiting. Maybe if they make the sequels, I'll show up somewhere just to take a look and shake everybody's hands and thank them for a job well done. Joshua Ignatowski, who's your favorite obscure military history figure? Well, here's one probably none of you have ever heard of. Battle of Little Bighorn. General Custer meets the end of his career as a military officer, along with most of the rest of the 7th Cavalry, on a hill above the Little Bighorn River. And we always hear about Sitting Bull, and we always hear about Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse led the cavalry charge from the Indian encampment that basically chased Custer to the top of the hill where he and all of his men were to die. But the guy that never gets mentioned is a Lakota Sioux named Gall, Gall. And while Custer and his men were trying to get to high ground chased by Crazy Horse and a mob of mounted um, Cheyenne, Sioux, hell, there were Lenape Indians. Battle Little Bighorn. It was the, United Nations of Indians were there, much to Custer's surprise. So while the mounted uh, Indian braves are chasing Custer up the hill, what Custer does not know is that Gall is leading a mob of warriors on foot on the lee side of that same hill. So that when Custer gets to the top of the hill, he is immediately attacked from what would be his rear position by Gall. And that's really where things go bad. That Custer's not going to be able to hold out because he's being squeezed by two forces that are, he's vastly outnumbered, more than 10-1 outnumbered. And he never quite makes the crest of that hill because Gall is up there to prevent that. And so he's a guy that never gets any attention for his efforts that day. So I would put him as my most obscure historical figure that I admire, simply because, hey, this guy didn't follow everybody else out. He thought, hey, I'm gonna get behind these guys. I'm gonna come around where they ain't looking for me. Which kind of a version of the Zulu horns of the buffalo strategy, but very cool. Speaking of Levon Cade, Levon's Scourge is out there, the 12th book in the Levon series. If you want to take a peek at that, I'd certainly appreciate it. So you can head right on over to Amazon and check that out. Levon travels the world, gets involved with the Mexican drug cartel in a scene that, well, you don't want to eat lunch before you read that scene. And then heads on over to Vietnam to go after the men who are threatening the lives of his family. Levon's Scourge. So anyway, that's it for me this week. Let me know how you like this new format. I might stick with it, depending on your likes and dislikes, because I'm here for you. I'm here to answer your questions. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. Thanks for subscribing. And I will see every single one of you, I hope, down the road.